Welcome to the GMAT Strategy Podcast. You're here because you believe there's a better way to study for the GMAT, and so do I. I created the GMAT strategy to maximize your results and minimize your efforts so you can get to the fun parts about business school and life as quickly as possible. My name is Isaac Puglia, and I've been teaching GMAT classes and tutoring privately for the GMAT for over 6 years, and I personally have achieved a 99th percentile score on an official GMAT exam and helped hundreds of students get into the business schools of their choice. I'm excited to be a part of your MBA journey since I think the world can benefit from the best possible business leaders that we can find. And if this show is bringing you value, please share it with your friends and family who are studying for the GMAT so that together we can make this process as easy and painless for as many people as we possibly can. Let's go. So we're talking about anxiety today. And anxiety is a deep subject. There are different forms of anxiety, and I just want to give the very hearty disclaimer that I am not a professional in dealing with anxiety. I'm not a professional when it comes to clinical anxiety. I'm not even a professional when it comes to just regular levels of anxiety. But I do have some recommendations that I hope can help at least some of you. They may not help all of you. For some of you, this episode might make things worse for you. And if it does, I apologize so profusely you cannot imagine. So much of my life is dedicated to making this process as easy and as painless as it can be for you. And the idea that I might actually work against that is absolutely terrifying to me. But what is more terrifying is that I might sit on some knowledge I do have that could help some people. And I trust all of you that if this does not help you, you are resourceful enough to figure out a way that will help you. Okay? So please take this advice with a grain of salt. I'll say this again in the episode, but this is just one perspective of someone who's worked in the industry for a long time, and it's not a professional or medically informed perspective. Today, I want to talk about test anxiety. This is something that I've been dealing with a lot in my tutoring practice recently with students coming in and people taking my in-person classes. It's something I see a pretty good number of posts about online, and I'd like to do at least a little bit in this podcast to address it, if not a lot. Give some recommendations, and then maybe based on the feedback from this episode from some of you or many of you who are struggling with this, we can take it to the next level in a future episode as well, because I'm very curious what has worked for some of us in our community and what has not worked, and I'd love to just compile a set of resources for people to eliminate test anxiety from the situation as much as we possibly can and just get everybody to, hey, how good of a business leader is this person likely to be? So with that in mind, let's get right into it. And let's start with diagnosing the level of anxiety you're feeling on the test. And I think that this is valuable because different levels of anxiety are going to dictate slightly different or maybe radically different solution paths in different situations. So the first thing you want to ask yourself is, when you're taking the GMAT, are you experiencing physical symptoms of anxiety? Things like sweaty palms, sweating just more than you normally would, even though it's not particularly warm in the room, significantly elevated heart rate, cramped stomach, things like that, hypertension in your muscles. When you're having those pretty severe physical symptoms, that's when you definitely want to go straight to seeking professional guidance. That usually comes in the form of a few sessions with a professional anxiety counselor, and I would strongly recommend doing that if you're in that situation, because it's likely that those physical symptoms are hurting your performance on the exam, and that could be hurting your future and consequently many of our futures if it turns out that you really are a great and capable business leader and can start a business or lead a business to having a great impact on society. A couple things about this. First, I think there's some stigma around getting professional help here, and I'll be 100% transparent with you. I'm probably not the best person to talk about that with, but I'm someone. I'm in the field, and it's something that I have dealt with a lot of my students. Fortunately, I don't suffer from this physical level of anxiety, but I have had a lot of students who have, and I can recommend a great group of professionals. I believe they're based out of Texas. And when I worked at Manhattan Prep, we used to refer a lot of people to these folks. I still refer people to these folks, and they get results. I think there's no other better way to say that. I don't know what their pricing is like these days, but I'll tell you, it is so worth it if you think about what you're going to spend on your MBA and what just a few sessions could do for you in terms of your performance on the GMAT if you feel that you're really being hampered by these physical symptoms. So the folks I recommend are a group of people that go by the moniker the Lovett Center, Lovett. And I will put a link to their website so that in the show notes so that you can get a fast link to that if you feel like that is a route that you'd like to pursue. Now, very little harm can come out of just contacting these people and doing a quick phone consult with them and seeing if it's a good fit for you. If it's not, maybe they can refer you to someone who is a better fit. And if it is a good fit, and within a few sessions for, let's say, less than $500 or maybe even less than that, maybe $100 or less, if they can resolve or even just reduce some of the anxiety you're feeling, to me, that's very, very worth it, because that could be 50, maybe even 100 points on your GMAT score, which is going to make a significant difference in the just raw dollar return on investment for most people in most situations. Now, the brand of your school isn't the entire thing that determines how much you're going to make and how much success you're going to have after school. So much of that is on you as an individual. But let's be honest, we wouldn't even be thinking about this test if we weren't at least a little bit aware that the brand can help significantly. Not to mention the other folks who you'll meet and the extremely, extremely valuable network that you will gain at a great school. If you have questions, as always, just reach out to me on Instagram at the GMAT Strategy, on Facebook, Reddit, and YouTube / the GMAT Strategy, and anywhere else you can find me. I'll do my absolute best to respond. I'm usually it's easiest for me to respond on Instagram and Reddit right now. So if that's easy for you, that would be great. And I love hearing from you. So feel free to reach out. Don't hesitate. Now, the next level of anxiety that I confront a lot with my students is sort of like one step down the severity chain from physical symptoms. And that would be things like really intense psychological symptoms of anxiety. So you're not really having the sweaty palms or the super cramped stomach or the hypertension in your muscles. There might be a little bit of that, but it's more about being in your head too much, or your head just goes blank during the test. That's something I hear from a lot of students, especially at the beginning of the section. In that situation, the thing that I've found to be the best is twofold. So I'm gonna start with the first thing and then get into the second element in a moment. So the first thing that I would recommend is integrating some mindfulness meditation into your study routine. Now, mindfulness meditation is great in the sense that it's a non-denominational practice. It has spiritual roots, I guess, would be the most accurate way of saying that. But it's not a spiritual tradition in the sense that you're seeking some otherworldly communing with a higher power or a deeper power. I mean, that's debatable, and it's sort of beyond the scope of this podcast. But I just want you to know, if you have concerns about that, most religions, as far as my education goes, can incorporate mindfulness meditation. And if you do mindfulness meditation, it doesn't mean you're religious or that you're going to be contacted by the spirits. But who knows? Who knows? Practice at your own risk. I'm just making a joke. But that's sadly probably not that funny, but hopefully you laughed. So a couple resources for mindfulness meditation. I guess first, why? Why should you do mindfulness meditation? Well, at its core, mindfulness meditation is practicing developing a different relationship internally to your thoughts and body sensations, which puts you in a position of power. Because if you're at the whim of whatever is happening in your body and mind, then you're kind of just relying on luck on test day and hoping that you're going to feel good. And for many of us, that's fine. But for a lot of us, it isn't. And what mindfulness can help you do is you're practicing the skill of creating a little bit of separation between your consciousness and whatever thoughts are in your mind or whatever feelings are in your body. Now, teaching a mindfulness practice is going to go a little bit beyond the scope of this particular podcast. I'm not prepared to do that today, but I'll make a couple recommendations that my students have found helpful. Headspace. Headspace is an app that a couple of my students have had success with. There's an app called Calm, C-A-L-M, which I think both of those apps have more than mindfulness guided meditations, but I think the guided meditations in there are reasonable, if not good. And if you just do a web search on how to do mindfulness meditation, you'll probably get a bunch of really great resources. There is actually some evidence behind the efficacy of mindfulness meditation when it comes to standardized test performance. For example, there's one study where people were asked to do a reading comprehension passage from a GRE, which is a very similar exam to the GMAT. And then they had a mindfulness meditation intervention. I don't remember what the exact numbers were. I think it was like 20 minutes a day for a month or something like that. And their performance the next time they were tested jumped by 16 percentile points with no other intervention other than the mindfulness meditation practice. Now, as a race, we're still sort of figuring out how our brains work and like why that stuff is so effective. But for our intents and purposes today, hey, there's evidence that says it works, so I think you owe it to yourself to try it if you find that you're in this anxious situation. Now, even if you don't struggle from psychological symptoms of anxiety, mindfulness meditation could help your performance. For example, in that psychological study, the people who they incorporated in the study didn't necessarily have pre-existing anxiety conditions. Their performance just improved from doing mindfulness meditation practice. So if it can get you results, I think it's worth experimenting with. Now, the next level down in terms of intensity of anxiety would be something like you're not really going blank mentally, but you're just feeling very overwhelmed when you're taking the test. And I think the intervention that I'm going to recommend here will also play very well with the folks who are having these more intense psychological systems. Like I mentioned, there's sort of a two-prong approach there. The first prong would be mindfulness meditation. But the second prong will also work for you if you just feel very overwhelmed by the GMAT. It's not like your mind is going blank. You're not really having these like super intense physical symptoms, like really intense sweating. But you're just feeling like it's difficult to manage the emotional aspect of taking the GMAT. There are a couple things that you can do. They really just come down to practicing more and practicing intelligently. So let me give you some recommendations for that. The first thing that can really help with just a lighter anxiety or a general feeling of overwhelm is doing timed sets of questions sequentially, similar to like a short GMAT section, from official source materials, and doing those regularly. So if you have the official guide, which basically everyone studying for the GMAT should have the official guide or have access to the official guide, in my opinion, that'll have a code in the front of the book that you can use to generate some digital time sets. And I'm a fan of doing it that way when you can, because you're going to be taking the test from a computer on test day. And so the most realistic practice you can get, I think, is the best practice. I recommend a simple approach there in the math section. 10 questions in a row in 20 minutes. That roughly equates to the pacing of the real test, but it's a lot less stressful to do that than an entire section, and you can sort of isolate some of the mental anguish and difficulty that you're dealing with and start to develop some strategies for lessening that. Now in verbal, you could do, let's say, 11 questions in 20 minutes. Even if it's 10 questions in 20 minutes, I think that's close enough for the verbal section, but if you run the numbers, you'll realize it's slightly less than 2 minutes a question for verbal. A couple things you can do, a couple tactics you can use to help you during these time sets if you're feeling that sense of overwhelm. The first is a simple deep breath in between each question. After you complete a question, deep exhale. Try to breathe into your stomach area, your diaphragm area, which is going to stimulate your parasympathetic nervous system, which is going to calm down the adrenaline fight or flight mode that we often get into in stressful situations, which is going to limit blood flow to the prefrontal cortex, which is an important part of our brains that we use when solving problems and managing time in stressful situations. So what you're doing there is you're just gently taking your body back to a place of recognizing, hey, this is a stressful situation, there are stakes here, but we're not being attacked by a tiger in the Serengeti right now, which is what the lizard part, the lower part of our brain, kind of thinks is happening when we're doing a test like the GMAT. It's this very real fear to that part of our brain that doesn't really have the data points to differentiate between looking at a computer screen that's really stressful and looking at an animal that wants to kill you. That's very stressful. So this is just part of the human condition, and so I think we're wise to admit it and to strategize about how we can deal with it. The other thing that you can do that has a little research backing is just take a quick glance at the ceiling. Lifting your eyes and stimulating your eye muscles, looking up at the ceiling, will reset your brain in a way that personally I don't understand the science behind. So maybe someone can DM me if you're into that and you understand why this stuff works. I'm fascinated by it. But as a professional in the industry, I think it's my job to just know what works and recommend that to people. So that's what I'm doing today. But both those things can be extremely powerful, even though they're extremely simple. And I've often find those to be some of the best strategies. Very simple, but it gets the job done. Now, if you're practicing that, first of all, I'd recommend at least 3 of those time sets per week. If you're in this bucket where you're feeling overwhelmed and you know you can grow in this area, ideally you're doing it 3 to 6 days per week. If you're still struggling with this stuff, then I think that the best intervention you can make is remarkably simple. And here's where I'm going to get sort of a little intense, I guess, with my recommendations. So if you're already feeling really anxious by everything we're discussing in the podcast, you might want to pause this and come back to it later. But there are some important truths that I think are worth addressing in this type of situation. And it's a difficult conversation to have with my students, but I find myself having it quite frequently these days. And so I'm going to put it into this podcast. And if it doesn't resonate with you, it's not the only way to think about this, okay? This isn't the be all end all, but if you find that this helps motivate you and helps you get results, then fantastic. If you're still struggling, either in conjunction with the methods I just recommend or after engaging with these methods for quite some time, the best place to start is with your core skills on the exam. And let's just go through right now and let's just give yourself a number, answering the question honestly, how good is your knowledge in each one of these individual areas that the GMAT tests in terms of pure knowledge of the material, like out of a book, how well do you know the stuff that's in the book, and getting questions, official guide type questions right, just one at a time, not in a set of questions, but just if you sort of remove the time pressure element, how good are your core skills without the anxiety piece? And let's just give yourself a number here. So I'm going to use these sort of broader categories, but I'll explain the subcategories as well. So math questions first. Math questions that have to do with fractions, decimals, or percents. These are things like questions about digits and place values. Give yourself a number for those on a scale of 1 to 10. How well do you know the material, and how good are you at getting individual questions right that ask you about digits and decimal places? How about questions that have percents? Give yourself a number. 10 would be perfect knowledge. Your knowledge could not be improved. You've mastered that area completely. You could give a seminar on what you would need to know from memory to people studying for the GMAT. That's a 10. 1 is you have no idea what I'm talking about. So I trust your judgment on the gray area in there. Other things that are tested in the fractions, decimals, and percents milieu would be questions that have fractions. Give yourself a number 1 to 10. Moving on, how would you rate your algebra skills? These are usually questions about equations. Give yourself a number. Exponents. Give yourself a number. Quadratics. Give yourself a number. How about word problems? Things like rates questions. Things like overlapping sets questions. Give yourself a number. And I'd recommend writing these down because it's a lot to keep in your mind. So you can go back, rewind, start over if you have to. Other word problem type questions are just pure algebraic translation. Things like age problems would fall into that category, or scheduling problems, things where there's people you're sorting into different groups. How about geometry questions? Let's break these down into triangles, polygons, and three-dimensional geometry. Give yourself a number for all three of those. Finally, in math, we have number properties, things like divisibility, odds and evens, and positives and negatives. Let's not forget questions about inequalities and absolute values, as well as equations. So that's not necessarily an exhaustive list of every quant area, but I think it's a good place to start. Let's grade yourself on verbal, sentence correction. We can break this into subjects and verbs, parallelism, modifiers, idioms, meaning and concision. How about critical reasoning questions? You can give yourself a number overall, and you can go back to the individual podcasts I've done on these content areas, but things like describe the role questions, assumption questions, strengthen and weaken questions, inference questions, and resolve or explain a paradox questions. Then we've got reading comprehension. Give yourself a number for how well you're reading. And then give yourself a number for general questions. And then give yourself a number for specific detail questions. Okay, so here's where I might get a little hard-nosed, and this will resonate with some of you and be motivating, and for others it'll be a total turnoff. And this is just my perspective, which I feel compelled to give because it's unique. And there are other perspectives out there. So if my perspective is not resonating with you, please just seek out instructors and tutors who do resonate with you. And don't just think that if you're not resonating with what I'm saying, then that means you're not going to do well on the GMAT, because that's just not true. That's just not true. There's 100 different paths to get you to the top of this mountain. And I've forged a path that I think works for a huge variety of people, but it may not be perfect for everybody. And I'm aware of that, and that's okay. I have a growth mindset around this stuff. So if you have feedback about this, let me know. I always want to improve. Now here's my advice. Take those numbers and anything that's below a 10, make a plan right now to start addressing that stuff today. Momentum matters when you're studying for the GMAT. The best way to create momentum is just start right now. Do something right now that's going to get you headed in the right direction. Even if it's just downloading one of the flashcards apps that I'm about to recommend to you, just get something going right now. Just take action, because it'll be so much easier to take action tonight and take action tomorrow if you already took action today. Momentum works both ways though. The more you put this off, the more you don't do it, the easier it's going to be to keep not doing it. And the more this anxiety is going to persist if it's a result of lack of perfect knowledge in these subjects. So we're going for perfect knowledge, everybody. If you're experiencing anxiety about this stuff, I'm not saying you need to have perfect knowledge of this stuff to get a great GMAT score. That's actually not true. Now, if you're targeting a perfect score, yes, you should know basically everything perfectly. And even then, there's a little bit of margin for error, because most of us are going to miss at least a handful of questions on the GMAT, and it's possible to get really high scores and still miss questions, depending on where you miss them in the section. And if you have no idea what I'm talking about right now or why that works, just head to my website, thegmatstrategy.com, and check out the first 20 minutes of the video that's right in the middle of the website. I'll sort of tell you what you need to know about the GMAT scoring algorithm. But if you're experiencing anxiety around this stuff, you must address these core content issues, because if that is the thing that's contributing to your anxiety, then all these other interventions will just not be enough to get you to your peak performance. And you might be able to save yourself a lot of time and stress by just knowing the material better, okay? So don't put this off. A couple recommendations here. Not knowing this stuff at a 10 is going to really hamper you. That's kind of like being unprepared for a meeting and also being dressed inappropriately for the meeting. So not being prepared is kind of like the anxiety piece, and like maybe you could go off the cuff. But if you have this other element where you're like a little self-conscious about what you're wearing, that's just going to undercut like the raw performance that you could have theoretically given. It's just going to be taking cycles away from actually performing. And so we want to do away with that background anxiety and just be as prepared as we possibly can. And then if we get a curveball in the presentation that we weren't prepared for, okay, that happens to the best of us. Maybe we flub a little bit there. But at least we dotted all our I's and crossed all our T's in terms of what we could control and predict. And content knowledge is something that's extremely controllable with the GMAT. You have all studied for tests before, where all you had to do was memorize a bunch of stuff and practice it a little bit. And that's basically what I'm going to recommend in terms of getting to a 10. Now, some recommendations that can get you started right away is our digital flashcards apps. I think Quizlet is a great fit. There's a lot of user-generated content on there. You may be able to find some content knowledge flashcard sets already made. I didn't look at any before this podcast. I apologize for that. I obviously wish I had done that. But we're deep into this now, so I'm going to rely on you to do that. Let me know if you find any good ones, and we can share those with the community. Anki, which is spelled A as in apple, N as in never, K as in kangaroo, I as in your boy, Isaac. Sorry, couldn't know myself. Well, probably could have, but I clearly did not. Those are both really, really great resources that I hear a lot of students having a lot of success with. So I recommend those. And you can make your own flashcards for things like, what are all the things I should know about quadratics? Or you can even make flashcards out of problems. That's something I had a lot of success with back in the day when I was studying, is just making the front of the flashcard the actual text of the problem itself, and then on the back I would map out every possible solution path, and then which one was best and why. That's a really, really great study tactic. Physical flashcards work great as well. If you prefer that, just be honest with yourself and do what's going to work for you. And if it's not working, switch it up. Now, I want you to be relentless with this, everybody. You just have to know the basics, or you're going to waste a lot of time and stress yourself out by thinking there's this sort of background anxiety and maybe you have this physical condition, but really you just haven't sat down and handled the core content. You're building a beautiful house on top of a shaky foundation. And in my opinion, I can't think of an excuse for someone to not know this stuff unless they're already just very close to their goal score and they're just trying to get that last 30 points. Okay, maybe you can just kind of piecemeal that together. But if you're struggling with the anxiety piece, this is a great place to start, in addition to the interventions that I mentioned before earlier in the podcast, which you should also engage with simultaneously with this stuff. Now, one final note here that I'm hopeful is going to be helpful to everybody. The GMAT is inherently stressful. Again, if you don't really know how the GMAT scored, go check out the first part, at least, of my video presentation on my website, GMATstrategy.com. Just check out the first part of that video. You can 2x it and still get the main gist of this. It'll take you 10 minutes, and that 10 minutes could totally change your life. All of us are almost certainly going to miss about 30% of the questions no matter what we do. This is just the nature of the GMAT, and it's difficult to come to terms with for a lot of us psychologically, even if we understand it intellectually. Maybe the better way of saying that is it's difficult to come to terms with emotionally, because the test adapts to my performance. It's always going to find my ability and then show me many, many questions that are above that theoretical ability range to try to double check, okay, are you definitely below this range? This is how the test sorts us into these buckets, as it were. So in a sense, it's kind of like no matter how well you know the material, there will still be questions that you don't really know how to do in a reasonable amount of time. Now, there's a tiny, tiny subset of people who can probably get every single GMAT question right, but that's just unbelievably rare. And if you're in that group, I don't even know why you're listening to this podcast right now, but if you are, shout out to you and congratulations on having a huge advantage. That's awesome. You should capitalize on it. But here's the thing. If you fail to accept that no matter how well you know this stuff, you're still going to get questions, and there's going to be a part of you that's going to be emotionally hurt. You're going to experience emotional pain in that situation, because we've all, basically all of us, to my knowledge, been conditioned to think that being wrong is bad, and that if we're wrong, we are bad. It hurts the ego. There's these sort of baseline assumptions that are kind of difficult to weed out of the human psyche, and that's just based on the culture that many of us have been raised in, and that just is what it is. But again, if we fail to strategize around it, then that can hurt us in ways that it doesn't have to. So just know that if you're seeing hard questions and you don't know how to do that on the GMAT, how to do them, that actually could be a really good sign. It might be a sign that you're performing well and the test is showing you these questions that are a little beyond your ability level. Now, having said that, you still can't afford to miss all of those questions and get a killer score unless your ability is just comically high and you're only missing 780 level questions and then you land on the 760 mark or something. Like, hey, that's great. But just FYI, you still need to be right more often than you're wrong. And here's the hard truth about that. That takes effort. And if you're really serious about doubling or tripling or quadrupling or 10xing your income, or you want to make more money than everybody else around you, or have a nicer house than the average person, or have your kids go to better schools than the average person and just never stress about money, pretty much everybody in the world wants those things. So you want to be honest with yourself and ask, what am I willing to do? What am I willing to give up to put in the effort so that I personally, with whatever abilities I'm starting with, and we're all starting with different natural abilities, how much effort am I willing to put in to outwork and outperform these other people who basically, they want to take my spot at this school. They want to take my spot. Now, some of you are going to be turned off by competition. Some of you are going to be turned on by competition. I'm just telling you the truth right now. Many, many people are going to compete for very relatively few spots at Stanford University. Now, it doesn't mean that if you don't get in this year, you can't get in next year. It doesn't mean you're never going to get in. If you can't figure out a way to crack the GMAT, there's always the GRE, which I'll do a podcast on in the future if you're struggling with that. I'm just saying, leverage this situation if it helps your performance. If it doesn't help your performance to think about this competition and that just increases your anxiety, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. Focus on running your own race. Put your head down, put the blinders on, get to know the material perfectly. That's your first step. And integrate some of the resources that I mentioned earlier in the podcast. And just be better with your anxiety tomorrow, or basically be better with your anxiety by the time you go to bed tonight than you were when you woke up. If you do that, it is only a matter of time before you succeed. I promise you. I've seen people stay in the GMAT game for years. I'm not saying they should have done that. I'm just saying they did it and they eventually got the win. And those, in many cases, those are the folks I'm most proud to have worked with and have been the most inspired by. So just know that whatever struggles you're dealing with right now, if you can find a way to overcome them, and there is a way, in my opinion, there is always a way, whether you see it now or whether you see it 2 years from now or not, it's there. You just have to be willing to do the work to find it. If you can find a way to overcome that stuff, you can inspire so many people. You can do so much good in the world if you find a way to overcome your own limitations in this situation. And I just made a post on Instagram recently of my man from Australia who studied, I think, for like 3 years. And it's just such a crazy story. And he talks about all the things you should avoid. I mean, it's a great video. I wrote a summary of the video. You should definitely check that out if you haven't already. So I don't want to overcook us here with this sort of big picture stuff. I like staying in the nitty gritty and the tactical things that you can do. But this podcast really is aimed at talking about the mental game. And the mental game is huge. It's huge, everybody, when it comes to the GMAT. So if you're struggling with it or you know you can get to the next level with the mental game, do whatever it takes to get to that next level. It'll really help. One final note. You cannot sacrifice too much sleep in this process. It just works against you. I wish it weren't that way. If someone invented a magic pill where I could live forever or live, to a reasonable age and sleep, never or 1 hour a night, like I would be an early adopter. I'm not proud of that part of myself necessarily, but sometimes I'm proud of it. And it's just a symptom of my desire to have what I want in my life. And I hope that sparks a similar fire in you. But you can't sacrifice too much sleep. You have to find that sweet spot where you're getting enough, not too much, not too little, so that you're not taking too much away, but that you're not losing performance throughout the day, and your work performance generally can't suffer because that hurts you in other areas of the application. So you just have to find a way to balance it and accept that you can't rush this process. To my mind, I've given you all the hacks, all the ways that you can accelerate your progress in the GMAT strategy class, and many of those I'm sharing with you in this podcast, not every single one, but a lot of them for free. But I think it's still important to note that it still takes time and it still takes effort. Even if we can cut that time and effort in half, it doesn't mean it's zero effort. There's still a significant amount of effort. I can just help you save against what most people end up having to invest to bend themselves in half to make this happen. So just be smart and be as tactical as you possibly can be so that you can get done with this faster than normal. That's the whole purpose of why we're here with the GMAT strategy, okay? If you have any questions, again, as always, feel free to reach out. And also, as always, my greatest hope is that this information will make your studies as easy and as painless as they possibly can be. If you want more tips and strategies for optimizing your performance on the GMAT, just head to thegmatstrategy.com and check out my video presentation on how to achieve your goal score in half the normal time and with half the normal effort. In the meantime, this is a weekly show, so please subscribe and stay positive and stay consistent with your studies. And if you have some difficult elements that you're facing, you're not alone. Just get tactical and take the next steps you need to get to the next step, so that you can eventually handle this situation, even if it takes a while. I'll talk to you soon.